Well, Haolonggood just keeps going, and each time it's with a genus we seldom see, or really want, or both. This time round, Haolonggood goes big. It's a sauropod, and it's Apatosaurus, and it comes right after Rebor's Diplodocus. Like Diplodocus, Apatosaurus needs no introduction. The name means deceptive lizard, and derives from the Greek apatelos, meaning deceptive, and of course 𝗨𝘀𝗲𝗄𝗧, meaning lizard, because the chevron bones look more like those of mosasaurs than of other dinosaurs. Apatosaurus was 21 to 23 meters, or 69 to 75.5 feet, though some have claimed they could possibly be 30% longer, meaning possibly going up to 30 meters, or 98 feet. This model is about 66 centimeters, or 26 inches, so just on length, it would be about 1 to 35. And here's how it looked next to it. Like all of Haolonggood's offerings, this one comes in two variants. There's an orange and a blue. This time I got only one. First of all, I've said this countless times, but this time I really mean it. I am out of space. I recently took down many dinosaurs and dragons to put into storage for rotation at a future point. Now second, this thing is a very solid 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds. I have a couple of other dinosaurs planned for my sauropod shelf, and it won't take much more. Now thirdly, I didn't like the look of the orange. I prefer plainer color palettes for sauropods, and while I believe some patterning is nice, I like them subtle, and the orange is too flowery for me. In addition, many years ago, there was this wild safari, which I loved, but I stubbornly refused to embrace the new miserable sizes. Now this one seems to be an answer to that. The general color is grey, perhaps grey-green, with a flesh-coloured underbelly. However, as you'll appreciate in close-up later, there are subtle complexities worked into this general scheme. The pose is of a stately walk of a ponderous yet alert animal, whip-like tail twirling. Looking at the head and neck, we immediately get a sense of just how robust the animal was, certainly more so than Diplodocus. All I see is neck, with a tiny head almost as an afterthought. The detail in the face is of Haolonggood's usual quality, but in addition, there are interesting areas besides just the usual scales and folds. Over the top, for example, I can imagine a thickened patch of rough skin. This kind of bonus you'll see throughout the animal. And while we're here, I'll remark that in terms of the shape, the apatosaurian snout is very squared off. In this model, there's a bit of a taper going into this concavity, and it's rounder than I'd expect. I do like the hint of the entorbital fenestra here, and a bulge of flesh covering the nasal, showing education about how soft tissues change the contours of the underlying bone. The eyes are precisely painted, though it seems like it could sit just a wee bit higher. The pupil is cleanly separated from the sclera and generally nicely symmetrical. There seems to be a rather droopy lip, thus overlapping and hiding the line of the tooth row. The throat area is rather spiny, reminding me of what you might see on an iguana, giving it a tough look. And speaking of tough, we have of course to talk about that very robust neck. It's thick, and unlike most sauropods where the first impression might be of length, in this one, it's girth. Now looking at it from the side, you see how the head tapers off to an almost comparatively puny little nub from the width of the base. And from the front, you can also see this, though I have seen reconstructions that give it even more width from this angle. Now looking at the detail, you can see there's a different aesthetic to the scales than in say the Rebor Diplodocus we just looked at. There are of course wrinkles and folds, but I always get the idea there's something more underneath the skin. I've mentioned the top of the head, but if you look here, dorsolaterally, there are true osteoderms buried subcutaneously. As for the skin, there's a thin, papery quality to the appearance, quite a contrast to what I expect on a huge animal. And from the top too, you can appreciate that even though this thing is generally grey, perhaps with a shade of green, there are subtle patterns infused into the skin. Now, you may not see it in camera, but some of it almost looks like dappling. There are midline osteoderms, though much less pronounced than in the Rebor Diplodocus, and I like this difference. Here and there you'll see hints of the lighter pink or beige poking through. Deliberate or not, I like it. On the underside, now here we have something very interesting. You see what looks like growths or outward expressions of osteoderms. Some blend into the flesh color of the skin, while others are accented with a very nice fade of color. Now what these might be, I'll talk about in the science part later. Now, the body of Apatosaurus is very compact. It had 10 pairs of ribs, and the torso is short and can actually look pretty compressed, as you can see in different reconstructions. As we go down the animal, we can see the scale detail of course, but also the little complexities of paint application that's not really easy to see from a distance. And moving down the spinal region, aside from these true osteoderms, I also get the sense there's something else. Almost like some kind of hardened, either subdermal armor or else plates of thickened skin. If so, it's a very interesting speculative idea, and I applaud Haolonggood for trying things like this, though this is a lot more subtle than the crocodilian scutes they gifted Pentaceratops with. And going down the tail, you see more of that scale detail and how that paper-like skin wraps around it. And here we have that color accent in the tip that Haolonggood favors for its dinosaurs. And in the belly, you can see the scale detail, but infused with hints of grey, almost like pigment under the main flesh color. Then it gets prominent in the groin and cloacal regions. Very nice transitions. Now we get to the limbs, and here's where I feel that papery look doesn't serve it so well, as it does give me vacuum-wrapped vibes. Without doubt, however, the detail is really excellent, with plenty of care put into the sculpt. In the hands, you'll see that interestingly, that thumb claw isn't so prominent as I'd expect. In fact, it's really modest and can hardly be seen. Now, to be fair, this is also the case in some finds. And also on the underside, you see the traditional horseshoe arch in the hand. In the legs, you see more of that patterning, but a couple of things to note. First, in the anterior thigh, looks like there should be more muscle bulk. Instead, there's a rather atrophied look here, which isn't helped by the skin aesthetic, where I'd expect some tautness against muscle bulk. Then going down, there's this separation between leg and foot. Which is strange, where I'd expect some bridging of this gap with the extensor tendons. That aside, the detail is again of the same standard as elsewhere. So that's pretty much it for the actual model itself. Now of interest, we have to get back to that impressive neck. In our Rebor Diplodocus review, I talked about the possible use of the tail as a weapon. In Apatosaurus, we're going to look at the other end, the neck. As we saw, you can't help but note the incredible robustness of this massive neck. Taylor et al. In 2015 suggested there were specific adaptations for combat. Michael Taylor and Matthew Weddell will be no strangers to sauropod lovers, particularly if you're a fan of their blog SVPOW, or have this as one of your favorite books. They identify various features that support this hypothesis, and I'll link to their article below. But in summary, first, compared to Diplodocus, the cervical ribs extend further inferiorly, far below the centra. This ventral displacement of cervical ribs moves the hypaxial muscles further from the spinal axis, improving their lever arms and hence mechanical advantage, and thus allowing much stronger flexing movements. Next, look at these processes here, called the peripophysis. Now this is where the ribs articulate. In most sauropods, they do project downwards, but in Apatosaurus, they extend more ventrally and are also more robust. The suggestion is that this orientation allows better resistance to ventral impacts. Thirdly, the throat is an area full of vulnerable soft tissue, including the trachea, esophagus, and blood vessels. You would not in your right mind think to attack someone by slamming your throat into him. In Apatosaurus, because of how far down the cervical ribs extend, they create a trough formed between an inverted V, which serves as a protective hard stop on any impact before it can fully be transmitted to these vulnerable tissues. In fact, the cross-sectional configuration would follow more a triangle than a tube. In addition, you'd also have overlying connective tissue, which acts as another layer of cushioning. And finally, in front of the cervical ribs, there are ventrolateral processes. Taylor et al. Suggests they could have served as clubs, as the animal struck in a ventral direction. In life, they might even bear thickened bosses, or even be covered with keratinous spikes. The relevance here for us is, remember these structures here? I wouldn't be surprised if that took inspiration from that idea, though how these would have shown up in the surface anatomy I can't judge, given the bulk of soft tissue in the area. And in any case, I feel they should be somewhat more lateral. And certainly, there are multiple rows, so not all of them correspond to the processes. But even if independent of them, it certainly goes with the idea of some kind of feature to help in such combative necking. And it's a real pleasure to see thought go into this design that has some basis in theory from respected sauropod experts. And taken together, these adaptations give the neck tremendous strength and resilience to better batter the necks of rival males similar to elephant seals. Alright, some comparisons. First, let's look at Haolonggood's other sauropod, its collaboration with GR Toys in this Dichraeosaurus. You can see they've improved on the complexity of their sculpting. Those signatures like that accented tail tip are there. Next has to be the only other apatosaurus I have, this old Carnegie. You can see that even in those days, we knew that Apatosaurus was a real bruiser compared to Diplodocus. The elephantine skin and legs of yesteryear are now updated with more accurate proportions in the Haolonggood Apatosaurus. Including their tall important neck, and I'm delighted to have this update at such a massive size. Then of course, the latest sauropod, the Rebor Diplodocus, in more or less the same scale. Together you can appreciate the similarities in the whip-like tails, but definitely the differences in their relative proportions. You might like to also see the different skin detail. And finally, we can look at the 𝗨𝗪𝗪𝗲𝗂𝗪𝗲𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪actually, while we're talking close to 1 to 35 sauropods, let's bring out PNSO's contribution, the 𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗨𝗩 As you can see, different sculptors really have different aesthetic sensibilities. But now setting it gently aside, because I want to say here that with Haolonggood's Apatosaurus, I can happily say that from the original trio of the Carnegie Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, and Brachiosaurus, I have now updated versions in the Haolonggood Apatosaurus, the Rebor Diplodocus, and the 𝗨𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪�ึ delight us with its new offerings and to hit us with something completely different from the last three. And being a pleasingly sized Apatosaurus, truly a happiness for sauropod lovers like me. I said it of Rebor, and I'll say it now of Haolonggood. Together, these two companies have made sauropods great again, and I for one couldn't be happier or more grateful. So that's it for me. Let me know what you think in the comments, including your thoughts if you've got the other variant, and I'll see you in the next video.